So some big news and big drama hit the real estate industry the past week and a half, and this followed after the National Association of Realtors came to a settlement of $418 million, and thus changing how real estate agents are compensated for their services. So there's a lot of noise and clickbait right now in the media, but what does this really mean for you if you're buying or selling your home in the Phoenix metro market? So real quick, I'm going to explain to you how commission currently works and has worked for the past 30 plus years. Traditionally, what would happen is the person selling their home, they would hire a listing agent, and then they would negotiate a commission that the listing agent would get, and then they would also negotiate a different amount that would go to the buyer's agent. Now, typically in Phoenix Metro, most homes are about 2.5% for each part, so about 5% total that the seller would be paying for. Now, something the news has failed to highlight about this whole NAR settlement is that it still has to go to federal court for approval. But how the buyer's agent is going to get paid, that is going to change. And I will say this, there's a lot of unknown right now. And because of that, there's been a lot of speculation, hypothetical scenarios that we really have no idea how probable those scenarios really are. But this is what we do know. So with this settlement, we no longer can list the buyer's commission on the MLS or subsequently the Zillow or Redfin, other platforms like that. However, even though they can't list the commission on the MLS, they can still pay the buyer's agent if they choose to. Now, a lot of people in the industry are speculating that this is most likely what is going to happen, particularly in some markets within Phoenix Metro. And the thought process behind this is, okay, when someone goes and buys the home, they're already responsible for a down payment, closing costs, and then if they have to pay that additional 2.5% to 3% for a buyer's agent, affordability is going to become more and more challenging. And it already is an issue in a lot of our micro markets here in the Phoenix metro area, particularly for first-time home buyers. So think of it this way. So let's say you have someone buying their first home. They're looking at a $500,000 house. Okay, so we have this $500,000 house, but the seller is like, I'm not going to pay for your agent fees. Okay, then we have the same identical house next door that's for $515,000. So it's a little bit more expensive, but they're saying, hey, we'll pay that 3% for the buyer's agents, which is $15,000, but our price of the house is a little bit more. Which house is going to be more enticing for that home buyer? The monthly mortgage payment isn't going to be that different between the two, but they're going to have to pay a significantly less amount out of their pocket when they're actually closing on that home. So for a first-time home buyer that might not have a lot of cash, having a mortgage that's a little bit higher and a little higher monthly payment may not be that big of a deal for them, and financially may make more sense for them. And at the same time, the seller is netting the same amount of money. Now, I personally don't believe that the scenario is going to happen across the board, but for certain markets and certain price points, this is going to make a lot of sense for a seller and a home buyer. So another scenario that I've seen being highlighted quite a bit across social media and big media is that what's going to happen is these home buyers, they're going to see a house for sale. They're going to call the listing agent and they're going to say, hey, I want you to represent me during this sale. So this is called dual agency. And the one issue I see with this is if you already have a seller who has agreed to pay for the listing agent's commission, and then all of a sudden they have the listing agent come to them and say, hey, I found a buyer, but I'm going to represent them for free. So now you don't know that I'm solely negotiating on your half. I'm negotiating on both ends, but you're the only one paying me. Now, I for sure could see this happening still, but I find it hard to believe that that's going to become the norm. So another speculation that's really popular right now is that the buyer's agents, they're going to have more of flat fee rates, or they're going to have like an a la carte service. So for example, maybe you're spending for every house that you visit or for every home you look into, you're paying $50 and then you're paying them a couple grand to take you through the actual transaction and process of buying a home. Now, in theory, I do believe this could be a very good option for a specific population of people, but the interesting thing about this is these services or these fee structures have been around on the listing side for some time, but they actually haven't done tremendously well. The consumer has just decided that it's more important for them to actually do a commission based on percentage of the sale price with a listing agent versus going and electing one of these brokerages that has flat fees. So I do believe there's a population out for it that it would benefit, but across the board, I find that a little difficult to believe just based on past trends that that's something that's going to become the norm or a process that is commonly utilized. But this is really the biggest takeaway. Commission has always been negotiable, and now it is still negotiable. And the way I'm looking at it, there's already multiple ways that we can negotiate for our clients. HOA, seller's incentives, closing costs, home repairs. So even if my client who is buying a home, if we have an agreement that they're going to pay for my services, you still better believe when we are negotiating on a home that I'm going to bat for them and I'm going to try to get as much money from the seller as possible to limit how much money they have to bring to the table. And that brings me to the second biggest takeaway from the settlement. And that is the buyer, the home buyer is going to have to sign a buyer's representation agreement before they can actually work with a buyer's agent. And this agreement is basically outlining, as a home buyer saying like, hey, I'm only working with you as an agent. I'm not working with other agents. We're agreeing to work exclusive with one another. And then the second part is also agreeing that if for some reason the buyer's agent can't negotiate and get the seller to pay for their compensation for their commission, then there's an agreement that the buyer is then responsible for paying their agent. This is called a buyer broker agreement, and it's actually something a lot of full-time agents have already been using for quite some time. Now, what I personally believe what's going to happen as far as how agents are compensated and who's paying for what, whether it's the buyer or seller, is largely going to be situationally based and going to be greatly impacted on what's actually happening in that local specific market. What zip code is it and what price point is the home at? What type of home is it? And what's the natural state of supply and demand in that area? Having an understanding of those things is going to play a huge role in order to really negotiate the best you can on either side, the buyer or seller side, in order to get the best deal. And that's where I believe agents need to show their value. They need to step up their game in order for buyers to consider to hire them. But at the end of the day, these are just speculations. We don't know how it's going to pan out, but subscribe to my channel. I will keep you updated the best way I can, particularly how this relates to the Phoenix metro market. Thank you so much for your time and have a great day.